American Message, hosted by the one, the only Cam Lau. Today is a very special episode. I sit down with Chris Ingstad. He's the president of the Iowans for Tax Relief Foundation, and it's going to be a great conversation, so enjoy. Thanks for joining me, Chris. To start off, if you want to go ahead and share your background and career, how you first kind of got involved with the Iowans for Tax Relief.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Unlike a lot of people in a position like mine, and I get to lead a team of policy professionals. Again, you can think of it as in the policy world or political world, but it's a little bit of both. I did not cut my teeth doing campaign work or some level of staff position to a legislator. I actually worked in an investment firm that was founded by the same gentleman who founded the Iowans for Tax Relief organizations. And so at one point, I stepped over from the investment world to the policy and political world, and did some back office work on the Iowans for Tax Relief team, and that then morphed into me becoming a lobbyist at the state capitol for a few years, and eventually stepping into the role of president and getting to lead this team. And so I've been in a leadership role here in one way or another since the end of 2016. It's hard to believe it's been 8 years. Again, a little bit of a non-traditional background in terms of coming into this, but I think that's actually been helpful. I think that I can still see the world from a real world perspective, as opposed to one that's been strictly political. And I think that's helpful because at the end of the day, what we're working on and working for are real world solutions, not just political victories. And so that's helpful, and that's a good way to be able to frame things up for legislators, especially in Iowa, where our lawmakers in Iowa are definitely citizen lawmakers. This is not a full-time job for most of them. And so to be able to connect, again, from that real life Iowan perspective and not just a purely political one, I think has been helpful.
Yeah. Well, if you want to just kind of explain what is Iowans for Tax Relief for people who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, I'd love to. The name Iowans for Tax Relief kind of sort of says it all, but we actually do deal on a broader issue set than just taxes. Other issues, always from a conservative perspective on fiscal issues or on regulatory issues. We'd like lower taxes, less spending, fewer regulations. In other words, we would like to get government off your back and out of your pocket, right? Free up individuals and businesses to sort of carry on as they best see fit. We were started way back in the 1970s by a gentleman named David Stanley. And Dave had served in leadership positions within the state legislature throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so again, we're almost 50 years old now. And so even 50 years ago, when Dave looked around that Iowa Capitol, what he realized was we were a state full of special interests. And there were plenty of people lining up to try to spend tax dollars, but there was nobody there within that Capitol speaking up for the taxpayer. So Dave and other like-minded individuals founded Iowans for Tax Relief to be the voice of the taxpayer in the Capitol, to remind legislators they're working for those, Iowans, those real people, those small businesses back home, and not just the noisy special interests who are in front of them there at the Capitol. And so, over the course of 50 years, our organization has changed and evolved somewhat, but at the end of the day, our mission is still actually very much what Dave set it out to be, which is to speak up for the taxpayer, to remind legislators who they're working for. And I just further add, I guess, one area where we have changed, where we've taken some bigger steps recently, is not focusing solely on the state capitol, but diving into property taxes more and more, or issues of local governance. And, I don't know what really gets you and your listeners fired up from a political standpoint, but my goodness, most Iowans are really fed up with their property tax bills and the way they keep going up and up every year. And so that is another area where we've really leaned into recently. And, that's generally pretty well received when you're talking to Iowans across the state.
Yeah. And I have some examples I kind of wanted to bring up to you here in a little bit about some issues with property taxes and stuff just in my local area.
Sure.
But I guess, so your organization is at the Iowa state level, and you're saying on the local level. Is there anything like this in the federal government?
Well, I will tell you, aside from being an 8th generation Iowan and loving Iowa and thinking it's a great place to raise my family, I am also glad that I don't have to do work in DC. President Trump deemed it the swamp for a reason. I'm glad not to have to be a swamp creature, although actually I'm heading there tomorrow and Friday. But we will weigh in on federal policy from time to time, like the potential of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act or the Trump's tax cuts might expire. So we weigh in on that. But from here, we're not working the halls of the U.S. Capitol. Now, our counterparts at the federal level, the two closest groups to that would probably be Grover Norquist's organization, Americans for Tax Reform, or our friend Pete Sepp, who runs the National Taxpayers Union. Those are the groups that probably look, the most similar to us at the national level. And frankly, they're groups that we partner with. We will partner with them on federal issues, and sometimes they will come in and help us on state issues.
So is there an issue in the state house or multiple issues recently that you guys have had a hand in kind of bringing some positive change in our tax laws in the state?
There are actually, and you could not have set it up any better than that. I appreciate that. Yeah, we have now passed 4 rounds of income tax cuts in Iowa, and the fourth round will be completely phased in next year. And we will have a low flat tax rate of 3.8%. Everybody who pays income taxes to the state of Iowa will be paying 3.8%. When I came into this job a number of years ago, we had a progressive bracketed system. There were 9 different brackets or 9 different tax rates people were subject to, which makes it really complicated. And that top rate was 9.89%. So essentially, we were at 10%, really steep progressive system. And next year that will drop to 3.8%. So we've been able to play hand in getting the state's income tax cut, by more than half, which is a really big deal. But along the way, we have also been able to eliminate the inheritance tax. We've been able to phase out income taxes on retirement income. So those are really good things. On the property tax front, we've had 2 rounds of property tax reforms that brought a lot of good things to the table. But as people know who just got their property tax bills last month, my goodness, those 2 rounds of reforms have not yet been enough. So we need to come back and take a third shot at reining in local government spending. But we've done work on other issues too. I mean, some of it is, loosening up the regulations on home-based businesses, right? Again, not letting the government put a heavier burden on small businesses than they should. And one that we were really proud of and really interested in is we were able to be helpful in the state legislature banning universal basic income programs at the local level. Again, this is basically straight up socialism, where local governments, cities and counties, wanted to just start handing out checks to people. I was going to say citizens, but the reality is I don't believe there's even a citizenship requirement. And since local governments are funded primarily by property taxes, and property tax is already a problem, a growing problem, I can't think of a worse thing to do to the property tax burden than to add some additional, new level of government handout. Not to mention, we have a workforce issue in the state. So cutting people checks and not require them to work was not going to be helpful to that end. And frankly, it's just fundamentally against so much of what we believe is that government should be that hand up, not the handout. And again, this was literal handouts that some cities and counties were trying to do. And so we were proud of the fact that we helped get those prohibited in Iowa. And so again, hopefully we can point people towards more opportunity, more hard work, less government intervention, and certainly less government incentive to stay on the sidelines.
So what's the biggest issue that you hope to address next? I hear some people talking about getting rid of the income tax at the state level altogether. Is that something you guys are pursuing?
We would love for that to happen. We also probably need to live with this new 3.8% flat tax that's coming in next year, and understand exactly where our revenues and expenses are going to meet up in the future. Because for many years here recently, we have been running surpluses of over $1 billion. I mean, you'll think about that. A state the size of Iowa is literally collecting sometimes more than $1 billion in excess of their spending needs, right? So we have correctly been lowering this tax rate. Let's see how that plays out. Let's see how everything comes together, and then find ways to cut in the future. So a longer term aspirational goal is absolutely to eliminate the income tax. But whenever and however we do that, we've got to do it thoughtfully and prudently and kind of make it work within the whole system. And so we hope to keep working towards that. I don't know that I'd put eliminating the income tax on a to-do list for next year. What I do want to work on next year, and what I think there's a real appetite for in the legislature, is another level of property tax reforms. And the reality is all the different sort of guardrails you can put around that system are good and helpful. But the one thing they haven't done yet and that needs to be done is we need to put a cap on the ability of local governments to tax and spend. We've been promoting the idea of a pretty firm 2% cap. You can grow your property tax collections by 2% year over year. The problem is local governments, by and large, not all, there's some who've done a great job, but by and large, local governments have been growing their tax collections at a way faster pace than the taxpayer's ability to pay. So again, these property tax bills that just came out, I think the statewide average was a 6 or 7% increase. I don't know about you in your neck of the woods, but I don't know anybody here who is expecting a 6 or 7% increase in their pay next year, right? And so if you're not, well, then government is growing faster than the bottom lines of the families and the businesses who are funding. And that's just fundamentally wrong. And frankly, I don't understand how local officials can continue to justify that. I mean, if they want to talk about times are tough for inflation, my goodness, that's impacting families. Like, government needs to figure out a way to live within their means, just like families. They should not be able to pass on these extraordinary spending increases. So we hope to not just have another round of property tax reforms, but we hope to see a pretty firm cap placed on local government growth.
So who is the biggest culprit? Like, you talk about the state house versus the local officials. Who's obviously on the state house side, it's a much bigger scale, but
Yep.
who's actually the worst at overspending?
I think the reality is, so property taxes are solely a function of local government. So state government doesn't have anything to do with that. And the reality is, well, we can always look for efficiencies and maybe places to cut. And, we can have discussions at the state level about how we want to proceed. The reality is state government has done a really nice job of living within their means and reducing their own incomes, right? State government is the entity that has cut their tax rate from 8.98% down to 3.8, whereas property taxes have just been on this incredible upward trend over the last 2 decades. And so local government, with I'm sure a lot of good intentions on what they think they're doing with that money, they have grown so much more quickly than the taxpayer's ability to pay. And that's the group that really needs to figure out how to rein in their spending. And since they don't seem to be able to sort of police themselves on issue, we think the state government has a responsibility to come in and protect the taxpayer and put some restraints on those folks so that people aren't getting priced out of their homes.
Well, and what really fires me up is that I think there's kind of this sentiment around most of the population that, oh, the government's just going to take what they want and we really don't have a say. So what's your response to people who live their life with that mentality?
If you don't speak up, then I guess you're right. Then you are not exercising your right to have a say. But the reality is there are places and times when the taxpayer can and should speak up. And that is something that we're trying to cultivate in our ITR local initiative, is explain to people, hey, if you've had enough, if you think government's growing too much, if you feel like you're being priced out of your home, if you feel like you no longer own your home, you just rent it because you got to cut such a big check to the government every year, we can help you with that. itrfoundation.org, you can go to our website and connect with us, and we can even send someone real boots on the ground to walk you through this. But people absolutely can speak up with their local governments. Even local officials will tell you all of their meetings are open to the public, and very rarely does the public actually show up. There is incredible power in citizens grouping up and speaking up. And if you've had enough, or you just want to see how it works, or you want to voice your opinion, if you want to go and say good job, any of those things, local citizens, local taxpayers should do that. Take some friends and go to city council meetings, go to your supervisors or your school board and speak up. It is a public forum. In fact, a lot of the folks would say they welcome it. And if we can be fair to local officials, they do these things in public and in the open, just nobody participates with them. They pass their budgets, they pass their spending plans, and these local officials keep getting reelected. So if they keep getting reelected and nobody is showing up to speak up, why would they think they should do anything differently, right? It's this sort of tacit, like, okay, what we're doing if we never voice our opinions to them and we keep reelecting them. So I think the citizen actually has more power than they realize. And again, if you want to know kind of when and where and to whom to speak up, reach out to us. Again, itrfoundation.org. You can find ways to get us, and we'll help you with that. Because again, like, I live in Waukee, Iowa. Our organization is, our office is in Waukee. I don't pay property taxes anywhere else. We don't receive, services in other communities. So it's not for us to weigh in whether a given community's property taxes are good or bad. That's for the local taxpayer to have a discussion with their local officials. But what we do hear, we hear from so many local citizens that they're unhappy with their property taxes and what they're getting in return for that, that if they've sort of had enough, we can help you make your voice heard.
Yeah, and that's kind of my example I have here that I was going to bring up. So, like my school district here, they actually just passed an extension of their physical plant and equipment levy a few weeks ago. And, there's a lot of pros and cons to it. I was personally against it, and nearly everyone you speak to says they oppose it, yet the vote passed 364 to 42.
So here's what I would say on that. Again, I don't know anything about that district. I don't know what their needs are. The PEPL levy that you're talking about is restricted to certain uses, typically infrastructure, right? Physical needs, property, plant, equipment, those things. But there is something that people need to realize. And a number of these PEPLs, they have to be reauthorized, say, every 10 years, for instance. So many of these districts will have a PEPL in place. It will come up for renewal. And they will tell you, well, this isn't a tax increase. You're already used to paying it. This is a renewal. This is fine. And that's somewhat accurate. But what they aren't telling you is that is much like having a car payment, and you pay your car off 1 month, and the next month, instead of being able to recognize some savings in your monthly budget, you go out and you buy a brand new car at the same monthly payment and go, well, it's not really an increase. Well, sort of, but if you hadn't passed the thing, or if you would have passed it at a lower amount, you would have actually got a tax cut. Now, again, I don't know how your district is spending that money. I don't know their full picture, if that was the right thing to do or not. But people do need to understand there's always a choice, right? And if the voter said no to something, you might be surprised what your school board could find when they go back and revisit their budget, right? Oftentimes when local governments put a vote in front of the people, it's for something that is important. If your PEPL was to go to upkeep your HVAC system, it's important for the kids to have heating and air conditioning or whatever in the school, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's so important, why is that the thing you're putting at risk in front of the voter? Are you telling me there's literally nothing else in your district or in your city or in your county that maybe we could do without if this new thing was paid for with other funds? And so there are lots of local officials trying very hard to do it the right way. But there's also some that I think, if they were honest, might be able to make it work if the taxpayer didn't just keep giving them a blank check. And so we just want people to understand when these things come up, there's a very real impact of it. And frankly, if they, what are the dollars attached to it? Because 300 and some people in your community signed you guys up for another 10 years of frankly, property tax increases. So.
Well, and what bothers me almost just as much as the levy itself is the fact that the school's social media page, which is professionally managed by someone they pay with my tax dollars, was actively promoting the levy and spending time to create video interviews with all their staff members talking about the importance of voting yes for it. That just really hit me the wrong way.
Well, quite honestly, I don't believe that the district's actually allowed to sort of say vote yes. So if they actually were in some of their materials, that potentially is an ethics violation. Now, I don't think that actually changes. And again, I haven't seen it. I'm not accusing them of an ethics violation, but there are rules about what can and cannot be said under sort of with district property or on district time. And we have seen communities that have crossed those lines. I don't think it really makes a difference in the vote. But again, sometimes we're portrayed as the bad guy because we say, well, there's actually a chance to save property tax savings. I assure you, we are always at least following the rules. And in some instances, local governments are maybe crossing that line in their zeal to collect and spend your tax dollars.
Well, and so I'll just bring up my other example I kind of had here is that, I live here in Garner. We have just over 3,000 people. And our city, they just finished a while back a $2.5 million baseball field project. And that's not even counting the amount of private donations that was in the hundreds of thousands. Yep. And, I'm all for improving our town and improving facilities. And I don't know a lot about constructions, and, I haven't looked at the costs of the breakdown of everything. But
you haven't built your own baseball field lately,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And, but everyone I talk to is pretty upset about the fact that it costs $2.5 million to build essentially a concession stand and 3 baseball diamonds. And so, instead of holding our city officials accountable, they're just kind of praised for their contribution to the town improving things, but everyone acts like they're actually mad about it. And that's what my biggest pet peeve around this whole thing is that everyone's so angry, yet they're just standing idly by while we get taxed into oblivion.
Yeah, and again, like I can't weigh in on that baseball project. I will tell you what we see in many communities. It seems like there's a little confusion between wants and needs, and so again, it's up to each individual community or taxpayer to decide if a given thing is a want or a need. And again, what you're really speaking to is this dynamic we see all over the state: is people are mad, but they don't really know what to do about it, or to whom they should speak up or when. And that's the sort of thing we can try to help people out with. Um, if folks don't like the way their local government is being run, they can show up at the right meetings and voice their concerns, hopefully in a respectful way. They could vote differently the next time there's an election. They could even get involved and run themselves. And we've seen that people kind of realize what's going on, and they kind of get, they get bitten by the bug, and they want to actually make a difference. They want to go beyond just sort of speaking up to actually jumping in and helping to govern and lead. And that's kind of a cool thing too, when we see that happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I looked on your website a little bit on the different local tax things, all the different resources and tools you have there, and there's some pretty cool stuff there. I'm curious,
Yep.
what would you point people to first to kind of learn more and get involved?
They can go to so that is a project of ours, itrlocal.org. That's itrlocal.org. And just go click on your community. We have most things broken down by city, county, and school district. And, just take a look there. You may find that your property tax collections have grown at a pace that's way faster than what somebody might deem reasonable. You may wonder why, and you can look and you may find that your local community has taken on way more debt than the average, or you can see some of those things. And so we'd encourage people to just kind of click through that data. It's all pretty easy to understand and access. But at the end of the day, it doesn't even need to be about what the hard data says. It needs to be how it is affecting you. And so if the tax and spend decisions that are being made by your local officials are painful, if they are getting in the way of you doing something you'd like to do, again, at home or at work, like, they need to hear that, and they need to be responsive to their taxpayers. Quite honestly, a lot of times we see elected officials be responsive to their staff members, to their department heads. And those department heads are not bad people, and they're trying to do their best for the given department. But it seems like sometimes that is done at the expense of actually serving the taxpayer. And the advantage that it has is that department head or whomever gets to see the elected official all the time. They get to be at all the meetings. They get to weigh in. And as we've talked about over and over here today, so often the taxpayer does not engage in the process. So again, that elected official is going to listen to the person who's speaking up to them, and oftentimes that's actually the staff members or the internal department heads. Again, doesn't make them bad people for wanting to grow the Parks and Rec budget, but the elected official needs to understand how the taxpayer feels about that too.
Well, thanks for joining me today, Chris. This has been great. I definitely learned a lot of information that I wasn't 100% sure on, and at least gave me an opportunity to vent about some of these local decisions that have been bothering me. So I really appreciate it, and thanks for your time.
You're welcome. I hope your listeners check it out at itrfoundation.org or itrlocal.org and click around and reach out to us with anything we need.